Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us in what is a series of webinars run by TeamPolice with Police Sport UK. This was our attempt to keep the conversation going during COVID. Now that we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel, a bit of optimism in the air, we thought this webinar would be a good opportunity to examine or ask the question about the value of team sports to everyone's well-being. Our illustrious panel today, if I can introduce, we have Matt Jukes, QPM, Assistant Commissioner of Metropolitan Police and Chair of Police Sport UK, Vanessa Jardine, Deputy Chief Constable of West Midlands Police, and also on the Police Sport UK Management Committee. And we also have Temporary Chief Superintendent Brad Howe, I think Brad from Northumbria, who's the manager of the police men's football team, and Inspector Sally Bunyard-Spiers, who manages the police women's basketball team. And I have to say, Sally, I was very impressed. You sent a leaflet over, which we'll share with everybody about women's basketball. But I understand you're England junior, Welsh international, and GB Olympian on basketball, which makes my meagre sporting achievements somewhat in the dark, really. But before I bring the panel in to discuss this, I'd also like to introduce Mark Lees and Carl Tinker from Magnet Forensics, who are sponsoring this webinar. And I'll emphasize it now, and I'll make no apology, emphasize it later. We can't do this without business sponsorship supporting TeamPolice and sport in policing. So I'm very grateful for Magnet Forensics coming forward to sponsor this webinar and be part of our business partners as well as other businesses with TeamPolice itself. Carl, can I ask you to, if you want to say for 5 minutes or so, a little bit about Magnet Forensics and what it means to be part of the TeamPolice team?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. First of all, looking at that picture, it does seem some time ago that they did the Magnet headshot. So I apologise for not having that updated. Mark will tell you that I've lost significant hair since then. I blame 3 children in that period of time. So yeah, really pleased to be on behalf of Magnet Forensics. Myself and Mark lead the EMEA team, which is Europe, Middle East and Africa. But we are a Canadian company. We have been a company for 10 years now, and the company was born out of a passion for law enforcement from our founder and CTO, Jad Saliba, who was an ex-Waterloo Regional Police detective in Canada, and realized very early on that there was a lack of support in regards to digital forensics, and specifically with the way the world was moving to online searches, social media applications, apps on phones, and he realized there was a bit of a gap and developed his own software, which very quickly was used quite widely, not just in Canada and the US, but also overseas. And he made the executive decision to do a jump, which we're all very thankful for. And 300 employees later, we have Magnet Forensics, which is the leading digital forensic company when it comes to across phones, computers, and cloud data. So that's what Magnet do, and the reason we are passionate about policing is that we have many of our existing employees who are were previously employed within the police, and we just want to make lives easier for digital forensic users and departments in investigating phones, computers, and cloud data from a wide variety of cases. And with that, you know, the UK team in particular have developed very strong relationships with the police over here, and we're very proud of that. And you know, Gavin just introduced, just mentioned a couple of police forces there, which Matt and Brad are part of, Northumbria and the Met. We have innovation projects with both of those organisations, and We genuinely class the police forces in the UK as our partners, not just as our customers. So we're very proud to partner with police, and hence why we are here today. So with that, I'll hand over from one very poor ex-cricketer, failed cricketer, to another failed cricketer, Mr. Lees.
I've double muted again. Single mute. Yeah, no, thanks, Carl. Failed cricketer and still failing golfer, but still passionate about the sport. And I think, like Carl said, we wanted everyone to understand a little bit about magnet forensics and what we do when it comes to the works, and are really passionate about building the solutions with law enforcement to help with this, what is a unbelievable challenge now around the data stored on devices, mobile phones, computers, and increasingly stored in the cloud. So everything we do is built very closely around the needs of law enforcement from those early days with Jad, and really proud of the business growth. But, you know, Carl and I joined as a wonderful journey, growing up with a growing business, I guess, from a small business to medium size. But as we add staff to the team in the UK, I think we just started to recognise, you know, we're doing loads of work with law enforcement partners, and internally, as you know, we're kind of 5 people, then 10, then 15. Just that kind of glue that brings our team together. There's more to life than only the business and the functions of the things we make, isn't there? And we have a lot of passionate sports people in the team at Magnet. I myself actually did, you know, I used to work for South Yorkshire Police at a similar time as Mr. Jukes, and one of my earliest memories there as a young police staff person was being, you know, brought into the fold of the through actually the Golf Society, and a senior police officer at the time, to make sure I felt included in that. And that gave me an incredible insight and built some friends and connections that really benefited, you know, me personally in terms of the culture and fitting in, but it also benefited, you know, just those interactions at work. And it was something that really was a massive part of my time working for the police. And I know the funding to get the time to keep supporting that sport is hard to come by these days. So when we at Magnet, you know, got the chance to back some police sport, we really wanted to jump at it. Selfishly, we want to get involved ourselves and be part of some of those sporting events because we all love it. But we wanted to, it seemed like a really good way to make a contribution back into policing, who we rely on, you know, to pay our bills and help keep the business moving forward. So really simple for us, partly selfish and partly because we really believe in sport and the positive impact it can bring. So thanks so much to Gavin and all of Team Police UK to set this up and give us a chance to contribute, because it means a lot. So yeah, really proud to be supporting it.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. Thank you. What I'd like to do now is, before I bring in Matt and Vanessa, is just ask Sally and Brad for some initial reflections, seeing as you both lead team sports in Police Sport UK, in terms of what you see as the value of team, being part of a team in sport, to well-being. Sally, would you like to start?
Kevin, thank you very much for having me here today. I've been working with the national squad since 2006, when I became the team manager of the PSUK Women, and I took them through to the 2009 USPEs. It was an interesting time because as I was in sport early on, there was some sort of conflict around the accessibility of sport for women and men, and more so through the finances. And as I stepped into the role of the team manager, I realised that actually we had to add some value to that team spirit. So over a period of time, I've obviously got the team together in respect to getting new kit, new balls, and actually developing an ethos around what team actually means to them. And this has been something that we've continued through right to 2019. For me, you know, you have individuals in a team, but actually you have to bring all those together, and that has to be gelled really well. And that's the most important thing about team sport, is that you actually have an ethos that you buy into, and then you work towards. So for me, you know, team sports is really important in generating the individual and their ambition and their discipline. But actually the long-term effect is how you gel that team and how they then respond with each other over the years. And COVID is a classic example of that, where we were building a team going up to the 2019 European Championships, and obviously that was taken away from us come COVID, and we've been planning that for 4 years. And now we're actually utilising all that social media through Zoom and WhatsApp and Facebook to actually keep that team together and talking to each other, to the fact that everybody gets wished happy birthday from about 25 different people when it's their birthday. But actually the key thing is to make sure that we're actually driving them forward and they understand that. And what we have developed through women's basketball is a real ethos about how we look after each other. We're driving towards an elite sport, obviously with the Europeans, but actually on the whole, it's having that experience with each other. There's some great friends, there's some great camaraderie. And what that has produced is we've brought that into the national championships. So those women's teams that now attend the national championships feel the same ethos, and it actually has developed the PSUK championships going forward. So I think for me, the general thing is team sports helps the individual develop in themselves, but actually overall having that team together does create some real value to each other, and actually keeps them together, especially through these times with COVID.
Thank you, Sally. There's a lot there which we can come back to and perhaps discuss. But before we do, and I bring Matt and Vanessa in, just ask Brad for some initial reflections. Brad, please.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Hi, everyone. Absolutely delighted to be able to take part in this webinar, which I think is fantastic in terms it cuts to the core really of well-being and how we can develop that using team sport. I'll just share with you some reflections on the back of Gavin's ask there, if you like. And it's interesting listening to Mark. I found that interesting when he said when he walked through the door at South Yorkshire, he was immediately captured and he started to feel part of that team through the Golf Society, which is absolutely fantastic. A similar thing happened to me. I think when they found out I could kick a ball, I was pushed in the back of a personnel carrier and shipped off to play a football match almost in my first week. But what that did for me was it actually demonstrated that because it's quite daunting when you join the service, even more so now, given all the different entry routes and the significant change that the service is going through, that you have the benefit to meet other people who you might not necessarily work shoulder to shoulder with, but in other departments within the force, and start building those relationships. And I think that's where it demonstrated to me the power of playing in a team and almost providing a soft landing for new recruits when they join the job. So I've been lucky enough to run football teams within 2 police forces for the last 15 years. And the benefit that I've seen is that the eagerness and desire to be part of a football team has a number of spin-offs. You make relationships with colleagues. You understand what it means to play in a team because your teammates rely on you. And anybody who's played police sport or team sport will understand what that means. You make your contribution to the team, you feel part of the team. So there's a very much a building of a sense of belonging. But some of the other spin-offs that I've seen over the last 10 years is, and I will link it back to productivity in the workplace, because I also think that's important, is that physical exercise, good nutrition, healthy lifestyle, fantastic. But to be part of that team and to continue to be part of that team and to have the benefit of time off for sport and to be allowed by supervisors and line managers to have that time to be involved in those team events has been and will continue to be a bit of give and take. And what we've seen is a real desire by some people to ensure that they are performing well at work, doing what they need to do, and having that reciprocal agreement where they are being allowed time off to play sport. And I think that's some of the benefits that I've seen in the time that I've been involved. So in terms of footballing, I've been lucky enough, very lucky, to be put in a position where I've been able to chair the sports and social club within Northumbria Police. And just like Mark said, we capture people very early. We like to get them signed up for the force lottery, but equally, we like to get them to take part in sports, and it's about selling the benefits. So I think if you sell those benefits, explain what opportunities out there for people, then those people who share the same passion as we do on this call, I'm sure, about physical exercise, will take that opportunity and really excel in it. So those are just some initial takeaways, Gavin, at this stage.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sally. I'd just like now to bring in Matt and Vanessa for some initial remarks and perhaps some observations on what Sally and Brad have just opened up with. Matt, could I bring you in first, please?
I was going to offer Vanessa the chance to go next, only because then it poses me the challenge of saying something nobody else has said before, which is the greatest one. So I thought, since this is the first that Vanessa has joined, I'd be fair to her and give her the chance, and I'll have this tough job of sweeping up with something that somebody hasn't said. Vanessa.
That's very kind, Matt. Very, very kind. Thank you. Challenge accepted. So we'll see. You know, it's great to hear from Sally and Brad. And hi, Brad. I haven't seen you for a number of years, but nice to see you again. But one of the reasons that I got involved in what I'm doing is because I went on secondment in Northumbria and I worked up there for 6 months. And the manager of the ladies PSUK football team works in Northumbria and kind of sought me out one day, and that's how I came to support the women's football team. And similarly, a bit of a sort of goal for myself, or I was certainly a few years ago, going along to the national championships, which flipping heck, you know, for those that know golf, it's a 36-hole medal competition in one day for their championships, which for those of you that know golf is no mean feat. Kind of got asked to take up this role, but I think the thing I will pick out from what Sally and Brad, there's two things in particular. The first thing is the individual commitment, and you've heard from Brad and Sally there that it takes to run not only national teams but also local teams as well. And I know that you will both put hours and hours and hours of your own time into this. I know Michelle does, and I certainly know, sitting on the ladies golf committee, how much time people put in, which is just amazing, and the passion that you show and your commitment, you know, for doing this for the greater good. So thank you on behalf of all the teams, but it never fails to amaze me that your individual time and passion. But I think that the thing that the police team and the team police does, in addition to what you've both said, is it brings people from all over the country together, which, you know, you cannot underestimate the power of that, not only from a well-being, but from a sharing experience and from a wider police perspective. It is absolutely phenomenal. I went down and watched the football team as they played at the greatest football stadium in the world, at the Etihad, hint there for some people, and watch them play the worst team in the world, Manchester United ladies. No disrespect to the ladies, but you know, and I was fortunate to go and talk to the team afterwards, you know, and that, you know, officers from Northumbria, staff members from Staffordshire, from the Met, from you name it, and that coming together and the links that they then form in those other forces, not only from a sort of well-being and you know, and a camaraderie perspective, but also from a, oh, you know what, I know someone in the Met, I'll give them a ring, I'm sure they'll be able to help me with this thing. So you can't underestimate what it brings as a whole, as opposed to some of that, all the other things, which I agree in what Sally and Brad said. Really, really positive. It's been difficult in the last 12 months. I can't remember how many training camps for the ladies football team have been cancelled. I do know that now 2 championships for the golf have been cancelled, and big attempts to put one on in September, October have again not been fruitful because the courses are booked up because everybody wants to go. So, you know, there has been an impact, but I do know with the passion that people show that we will hopefully by next year get back on track. I think that probably, I'll hand over to Matt to try and pick the bones out of something new there to say.
Thanks, Vanessa. Matt.
Lots of new and really, really valuable points. So I'm now, I've got a couple of things to add, but so one thing just to say relatively sort of close to the top of this session is, as we form a strategy, Vanessa working with me and other colleagues to form the strategy for Police Sport UK and TeamPolice has become out of the pandemic. It's really good to know what to put on our to-do list. So it'd be really helpful if we got a couple of dozen people, at least I saw, with us. Be really helpful through the questions and points to think about what recovering well out of COVID looks like for police sport, and particularly for our team sports. So that's a real valuable opportunity for me. I wanted to say a thanks, actually, if I can, just before I jump into a couple of comments, to our sponsors. I'm on a phone, so I can only see 4 faces, and I couldn't see, Mark, yours when you started speaking, and then I've just scrolled across and realised that why the name was nagging me, and a flashback to 15 years ago in the Force Intelligence Bureau in South Yorkshire. So it is. I'm really grateful for the support of Magnet to this event, the wider support of our sponsors, and I remember very well the changing nature of interrogating phones and so on, because I used to authorise the purchase of new equipment, and Mark or one of his colleagues used to come through every week and say, we need to buy a new cable. It's 75 quid for this very special cable. And then next week we'd come back for another one. We bought you a new cable last week. What's this one? So I remember that we were trying to keep pace with technology even then, and that will probably be a theme I'll just come back to in terms of sport. But thank you to our sponsors, and very good to see you again. Mark. I wanted to say, without just turning this into thank yous out of sequence, thank you to Sally, Vanessa and Brad for the very points which Vanessa herself just called out, and that's the leadership of people who volunteer to coordinate and lead our sporting sections. And one of the things I'd like to just put a pin in really for the to-do list is how we make sure we recognise and thank people for what they do in that respect. And also how we encourage my colleagues, Vanessa's colleagues, Brad, Vanessa and I as senior police officers and our senior police staff colleagues to recognise how good it can be for people to be involved in organising these sections and sports, because I've seen people develop phenomenally. People who've been involved in organising championships get such a breadth of experience, probably don't realise quite the experience they're going to get when they volunteer to do it. But it can be a brilliant way of people actually picking up some really great organisational and leadership skills as well. But thank you to each of those on the call who already represent that. I was just going to leave a couple of thoughts hanging really. That was around the difference between personal commitment to well-being and fitness and the benefits of team sport. So both Brad and Vanessa have alluded to this, and indeed Sally did as well. We are very focused as Police Sport UK to make sure we continue to play our part in lifting the overall well-being and resilience of the service, to make sure that we promote people as role models through the sport that they're involved in, and that we make connections with communities. And then when the worst happens for people in their lives, that we're able to offer something in terms of rehabilitation as well. All those things we're starting to think about whether we need to keep pace with technology. We know that many of those communities are online more and more, so through various apps and so on, people connect up on their fitness and well-being journey. A lot of that is virtual, some of that is carried on during COVID. But what's different about team sport? And we know that the research shows that whilst there are huge benefits for your well-being, mental health and resilience in participating in sport, that those benefits are even greater in team sport, because you get more from doing this with other people. So against all of those areas, resilience, role models, connections, rehabilitation, there are particular benefits that come from not just having access to gym facilities or being able to access online tools or Couch to 5K programs and so on, but actually there are real benefits in taking forward that sporting activity as a team, leadership opportunities and on opportunities in a wider sense to benefit from the social space. I think there's a whole set of things about mutual support that come from team sport, and I just wanted to underline that, you know, perhaps for this session in particular, really interested to hear what we can do to make sure we promote not just sport and well-being, not just access to gyms, not just access to wider focus on fitness, but how can we make what some people will tend to see as quite traditional sports potentially still play our part. And my sort of, and finally, because Vanessa I knew would steal a couple of points, that's why I wanted to go first, but the connections nationally and internationally still important to us. But the one connection we haven't really talked about in respect to team sport is communities. And I just wanted to sort of just flag how much impact we've made in policing over the years by being around communities, to be involved as football coaches, to be involved in cricket competitions. I know I've personally been involved with netball because we wanted to make sure we weren't just reaching men and boys in our communities, but also women and girls. So what a huge part actually reaching out to communities can form of this, and how much team sport can very particularly give confidence to young people and sometimes marginalised people, and a better experience for them of engaging with the police service. So thanks for the opportunity to the sponsors. Really, we should now, Gavin, I think, turn to picking up points which have been raised by those who've been kind enough to give some of their time to join us, and perhaps put a couple of things on our to-do list.
I agree completely. And my sense, just listening to everybody, is I think now there's a sense of optimism. There's a huge breadth and ambition for police sport, not only within policing itself, but exactly the last point you've just made there, Matt, in terms of how police sport can be part and parcel of communities, competing in community teams, and also being part and parcel of working within communities as well, and using sport for that. One of the things I also picked up on there, which I think I'd like to come back to and just ask for people's thoughts are, and it's a point you raised, Matt, was in terms of, I think you said a strategy or a plan, to-do list of post-COVID. There is that sense of optimism, that light at the end of the tunnel now. What do we think we need to do to embrace and encourage team sports in policing coming out of COVID? Can I offer anybody to want to start with that one, please?
Yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because on a national level, we have different COVID restrictions in place. So for our team at the moment, we have England and Scotland players. We haven't got the Welsh or the Irish at the moment. But obviously, the Scottish are about 3 weeks behind us in respect to the restrictions that the association puts on players actually playing indoors. So we've got to be quite mindful that if we're going to pull the team together, it has to be when everybody can be pulled together. So there's a lot of monitoring of the restrictions. There's obviously a lot of work done by our team managers in respect to the different associations and the expectations that we have to achieve to be on that court. I think at the moment, certainly from a basketball perspective, I think we're allowed 30 people in a gym. If we were to play another team, that means basically we only have 12 players and 3 staff who work on that particular event. So I think we've got to be mindful that we have to look ahead. We have to try and have the opportunity where we can get those teams together. And that will probably need the support of different forces around the country. So for example, for us, we used to use Lancashire, Preston HQ, where we could actually use the gym there. It's a central point between England and Scotland. Therefore, it reduced the sort of travelling for players. But obviously that was then restricted because of COVID and obviously not transferring the virus between forces. But I think the most important thing for me would be that forces recognise that we're trying to pull teams together so that they can actually spend some time together, not necessarily playing against opposition, but just bringing them into a forum where they can get to know each other again, get to play that sport. And I think that's what I would be looking for, is that those forces such as Lancashire, which have the facilities which we can utilise, would support that kind of re-entry into the world of basketball.
Thank you, Sally. Brad, what about football?
Yeah, I've a slightly different view. I think we've got a real opportunity here with as the restrictions lift, because if I take Northumbria as a case example, we've built up some fantastic relationships with other blue light services, not that they weren't good to start off with, but they've been improved so much with the joint working in terms of the pandemic, but also our interaction at neighbourhood level with other community groups. And it sort of takes me back to maybe 20 years ago when I first started managing police football in Durham Police. And one of the real aims of that, of doing that, was to form better bonds with local communities. Some of those local communities who were hard to reach, or maybe not, maybe a little bit maybe a little bit anti-police. And I think there's a benefit going forward, and certainly through football, whether it be a local level in the Northeast, because I'm well aware that other forces do that in the Northeast and nationally, or whether it's the England police football team or the United Kingdom team. We are taking every opportunity, not just to play in inter-force competitions or the international games that we play, whether it's against the Guards or the fire service, but looking at opportunities at a local level to play other community teams, because I think there's a lot to be said for building up those relationships. And I think we're in a good place. Dare I say it, a positive to come out of the pandemic is that improvement in relationships with other community groups where we've had to work hand in glove because of the challenges COVID has presented. And I think we're on a bit of a crest in terms of making the most of that and continuing that. So from a football perspective, but equally from other sports, I think there's an opportunity for team police to move into that sphere a little bit more, and to perhaps encourage teams to play more games within communities against community teams.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. Vanessa, obviously you're involved in sport, but also on the management committee for Police Sport UK. How do you think we can start to think about collectively looking at how we can move sport out of the COVID lockdown period and encourage people back into team sports?
So I think one of the things, you know, Matt talks about a to-do list for us to take back to the management board. And one of the things that I would be interested to hear views around was this inconsistency across forces around team sports. So a couple of years ago, I wrote to all 43 chief constables on the back of giving the women's football team some support, because they were really struggling to get players released for training and then for matches. And, you know, a bit like Sally at that point, and they still are, it's just been put back, working towards the European Championships. And I wrote to all 43 chiefs to say, you know, would you be in agreement, or would you be agreeable to giving staffs who have been selected for national teams some time so that they can, you know, get involved and represent, you know, nationally the police. And I got back a mixture of results, to be fair. So the vast majority of chief constables I didn't get a reply from, first of all. And the couple, and they were sort of, you know, under 5 in total, I got back. I got a couple of absolutely no problem at all, brilliant to support, really happy to support. You know, if any of my officers are selected, great. But I did get a couple back saying, no, it's not prepared, you know, can't do it. Lots of reasons why, but staffing reasons, etc. So we don't have a policy, and people will just have to use their leave if they, you know, wish to take part. And that's all right saying leave, but, you know, many people have a lot of responsibilities, family responsibilities, caring responsibilities, you know, and their leave, you know, it's just not, it would be a lovely to be able to do that. And I wonder, you know, Matt, if it's something for us as a board to think about, whether we can get some consistency, because people, you know, want to do it. We know the benefits. We've talked about the benefits today, but as we come out, and Brad talks about a new opportunity and COVID giving us new opportunities, is there something that we can say? And it's really hard getting 43 chiefs to agree, and I understand that, and I get the position, and I get the position around staffing. But if we know the recognised benefits for well-being, surely this is something that we should be putting on the toes of chiefs and saying, you know, is there something that we can agree that you will sign up to a certain level? And then what doesn't have to happen is individual team managers kind of going begging to their national leads, people like me, to say, any chance you can pull some strings here? Do you know my chief? they're not really helping, you know, and I'd like to try and get away from that. So I don't know, Matt, if you have a view on that, it's been done before, but I'd certainly be really keen so that we get some consistency and it's not individuals going, we can go as a collective.
I think it's a really important point, Vanessa, and it's one that's come up in previous conversations we've had as well from people who've been involved in police sports, have gone to compete, you know, on their own time, probably with their own transport, arriving there and, for instance, competing against the Team Army, who are fully sponsored, supported and equipped to do it. So there's something here about maybe the confidence of the service to think, actually, is this something that's important in terms of well-being? Matt, I'll bring you in on that point. Is this one of the things which could be included on the conversation within Police Sport UK as on the to-do list?
Yeah, I think it is. And I mean, you know, colleagues will know it's been on the to-do list for, you know, for a number of years. And I suppose at points there's been concern about consistency leading to a sort of race to the bottom, that if we actually pushed too hard, we would only be able to agree the worst outcomes for people. So we've done a lot of what Vanessa's just described of people picking up the phone. I think there is an opportunity now, and I think I'd suggest we attack it at two levels really. And Brad and Vanessa's sort of call for using this moment is a really, really valuable one. I think we do have some people who are great role models, who plough a lot of time into demonstrating the values we've described and the value that comes from team sport that we've described. And they are, some of them, you know, at the upper end of our competitive level, the people who are in our national representative teams. And I do think for them, it is quite difficult for us to put it all on their toes to resolve what it means, because often their competition will be taking them further away from home and so on, and they're probably already going to use some of their own leave and finances and so on to do that. So actually, to get some support from forces for the national representative teams confidently in the way that you described, Gavin, in the way that other sectors don't struggle with, I think is something maybe we should prioritise and look again at, because they are ambassadors. You know, they do compete for the GB Police, and they are ambassadors for the service in a whole range of settings, including our contact with not just the other emergency services, but the armed forces and so on. So yes, I think that level is a really important one for us to think about what we can do. And at completely at the other end, in many respects, at grassroots, we certainly here in the Met have got a provision for special leave for volunteering effectively, and we would also include, you know, depending on what your role is, you might well be coaching a local or be involved in one of our many sort of diversionary projects with football, for example. We do a lot of stuff with the Premiership, Premier Kicks and so on. That's working time, you know, for a lot of officers anyway, because it's part of their role to engage communities. So I think, and of course, to connect those two things up, often our people who are our best and most competitive sports people are also great contributors to local grassroots sports. So an unpacking, a long way of saying I agree with Vanessa, and I wonder whether for the to-do list, Vanessa, one of the things we should turn to as the summer approaches, being realistic, is actually a kind of a message back into forces and a conversation back with forces to say we're going to reboot and kickstart police sport. We've kept it going during the pandemic, but we all need your support in these ways and really try and kickstart that conversation.
Can I just offer something else as well, Matt? You raised leadership and that individual commitment. Brad and Sally are exemplars of that, because, you know, these teams don't just work on their own. They work with the commitment and passion of those who, one, love their sport, but are prepared to put a lot of their own time and commitment into organising it, seeking out future talent, arranging competitions, etc. how can police sport recognise that, I suppose, and celebrate it?
So I hope that we're going to, and a nod to sponsors here, if I may, not just the ones who are online, but the ones who are potentially around us. I think actually being able to give some time to acknowledge that and being able to recognise it, bring people together, make those awards, which we've had on the shelf effectively,
Yes.
pending an awards event, I think would be a great opportunity and a time to kickstart.
Yeah.
I'm slightly thinking now about Vanessa's points about maybe the reboot and kickstart, and perhaps we could, if we can do those things together, celebrate the great, contribution, and then turn to colleagues and say, having heard what you've heard, could we do more? I think would maybe be a thing around timing. I think one of the things which all of our section chairs should do, and I did 18 months ago, maybe it's approaching now because it was at the run up to the end of the year. Ian Campbell, who's online, would remind me, is actually express those thanks through chiefs to the section chairs and secretaries, treasurers and other volunteers, because sometimes it's just bringing to a chief's attention that they've got someone who works really hard on our behalf in their numbers. It's not always clear. So Ian will remember we did an exercise of letter writing, to my regret, because we've had a bit of a fallow year and other things have been around us. I didn't do that at the end of this, at the last calendar year. So that's a good prompt as well, maybe on the, there you go, 2019. So it is coming up. It will soon be, unfortunately, 18 months. So yeah, we ought to revisit that thanks and appreciation. And then also a bit of flex by forces to acknowledge that by people sometimes, to recognise that the time that they spent, putting together the golf section program, or putting together, tearing their hair out trying to get the team together, actually is time that they're giving on behalf of the service. Yeah. And not just something they're doing recreationally, which I fear will sometimes be the assumption. So a clearer message about the value as well in all of that messaging we want to do, recognition and reward for the contribution people make, and making sure we celebrate that, and they feel supported by forces with the small things that count, like help to get your messages up on the intranet and things like that, which can sometimes be a bit of a chore in forces. So making sure that our comms teams and others feel that they've got the right direction to support it.
And I think Vanessa's point, which was absolutely spot on, is there's an umbilical link for sport to your health, your well-being, how you feel about yourself, which has got to be a positive for any organisation, any employer, in terms of looking after your people, that they feel healthy, they feel valued, and they feel looked after. I think I know we've got some questions coming in, but one thing I just wanted to pick up before we come to questions, and it's something Brad mentioned, was the value of team sports and how that is, I suppose, I think the way I can describe awkwardly, is translated into the workplace in terms of that value of being in a team sport, and how that translates itself into how I think you Brad, you mentioned that value which you bring back to the workplace, productivity, that was the word you used. Sally, Brad, can you broaden on that a little bit in terms of what you see and how that can be broadened back into the workplace?
Yeah, Gavin, no problem. I think I could probably recount quite a number of examples where individuals, for whatever reason, have struggled to fit in on a particular team, struggled with some of the tasks, needed a bit of confidence building. And I'm sure everybody who's been involved in sport and managing a team is, it's not just about what gets done on the pitch or in a court or wherever you play that sport, but there's a bit of consoling on occasions. There's a need to put an arm around people on occasions, to make them feel a bit special. We're all different individuals, and we all respond in different ways, don't we? But what I've found is that some of those individuals who've needed that arm around the shoulder, or perhaps a discussion on their behalf with other managers within the organisation, just to put across how they're feeling, or perhaps articulate maybe where some support is necessary, has actually been paid back in dividends, because that individual has gone on to improve themselves, to be more productive, to really support the colleagues. And I don't think that can be underestimated. And I think it was a point that that Vanessa mentioned in terms of when you look nationally at people coming together, and I've seen the benefit of that, where people have come together nationally for the UK police team, and there's equal benefits with that, where people have gone away, they've got that good feeling about themselves, and they go back with a bit of kick in their step. So I've seen it on many levels, and I don't think that should be underestimated, the power that's of team sport in that respect.
Thank you, Brad. So, Sally, what's your perspective on this in terms of from your experience?
Obviously, we run a women's section and a women's team, and one thing I've learned over the years that we have to drive the leadership in women and female police officers and police staff. So the one thing I have seen through the programme, not just the national programme, but obviously the United Kingdom programme, is we see women emerging as leaders. And I've been delighted this year to hear that several of my team have taken on temporary roles, whether that be at sergeant or inspector level. So I generally do feel that the sport, that the fact that you have to go through success and failure in sport does develop you as an individual. It does give you that confidence. The other element to it is there are ranked officers on the team, although that should never play part in sport. The fact is you can advise and talk through those things. So I've actually had several conversations with my counterparts who are going into temporary roles, just to talk them through how to manage staff, how to deal with adversity. So I think that development, not only on the court but off the court, is really important for women. And I know I've been watching the women's football quite avidly, because we were both going towards the USPEs, and I think we have a very similar process in developing the individuals, not only on the court but actually when they go back to their home forces. And I'm really pleased that we see that in all women's sport going forward. So I think from a team police perspective, it's a real plus for women.
No, thank you, Sally. Vanessa, do you think we underestimate the value of team sports in terms of how that's translated back into the workplace?
Absolutely, I really do. I don't think that there'll be many senior leadership teams that know which of their staff are involved in national sports. And like I say, I having written to some chief constables, I genuinely don't think there is the visibility there. When you do give them the visibility, they come back very proud and very supportive. I mean, I'll be interested to know, and I haven't had any feedback, but I wrote to Brad's chief constable to highlight the fabulous work that Michelle had done, who's the team manager for the football, because she's stepping down and she's done it for a number of times. And I know whatever, I'd be interested to know whether that ever got translated into anything, because we just don't have the visibility. And again, maybe that's something that we need to take back on the board as to how we do that on a more formal basis, and take that into the centre to say, you need to be aware of this and be really proud and of it, because a lot of these athletes are competing at really high levels. Yes. And then the competitions that they are really, really high, and you listen to what Sally's done in her sporting career, brilliant, and I think it's something that we should be much more vocal about and raise that visibility.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, that's one of the things I've learnt, having started when I left, retired from the service and joined Team Police. I mean, I thought I knew it, but what's really struck me was the number of colleagues who are involved in sport at the highest level. And it's just unsung. It's just not highlighted at all within the service. Matt, maybe this is another one on the police sport to-do list, to maybe look at how we can translate that value recognition of being part of sport and team sports, and what that means in terms of personal development into the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you've only got to look at the facts. I know sporting analogies don't work for everyone, and we have to be careful, don't we, to make sure that we do feel inclusive. But you only have to look at the number of leadership teams who've got in as a keynote speaker some sporting coach, or, you know, we're all very interested, aren't we? And, you know, we are, because we're in this community, but I think more widely, there are many, many people who are interested in what sport can tell us about life. And, you know, I've sat with colleagues who were going through chemotherapy, who have described how they had chunked up their chemotherapy phases in the same way that they'd profiled their Ironman training. You know, the whole kind of, you know, win, lose or draw experience that you have in sport, you know, isn't every day in policing just like that. You know, some days we win, some days we lose, and you generally feel quickly pretty happy if you get away with a draw most days. You know, there's something about the you know, life in a blue suit, as it was once described to me. There's something about a career in policing which means you need that kind of ability to pick up and go, but don't you also need the ability to be able to look at the strengths of a whole team? You know, one of the things that you know, my first and you know, most passionate team sport was rugby. And, you know, that you could be tall, you could be short, you could be lean, you could be chunky. There were many, many different ways you could make, you know, you could, you know, every shape, bring in something to the team. And, you know, flair, quiet people, you know, aggressive people, humble people. So all of those things, which I think there's a message there. So what do we do with that, Gavin, is the question. I think one of the things we can definitely do is celebrate, but I think there's a challenge. I think the translation into both our wellbeing strategies and our community engagement strategies are the two places where I think we should continue to press this point. And I feel, again, very motivated by these conversations, and certainly as we look to exit, there's something there we should really exit the worst restrictions and worst impacts of the pandemic. You know, there's some key messages for us there.
I agree completely. I wrote a short blog just prior to this webinar, and in it I quoted Matthew Syed, who you know, it was in my mind when I said that. Yeah, and he does exactly that. He relates the psychology of sport to everyday personal team development, business development. So there is definitely something here which I think, you know, we can perhaps capture, which goes back to Vanessa's point, which leaders can actually say, actually, there's a real value here in recognizing and encouraging my people to be part and parcel of sports and team sports going forward. And also, and I keep going back to this, again, my experience was, it's one of confidence for the service as a whole to celebrate the fact that we are supporting great team sports and individuals in sport itself. What I'd like to do now, if I may, is, Lisa, have we got some questions, please, from those who are on the webinar?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of a number of interesting comments here. People saying, yes, we need to go and recognize those people. There's a really interesting discussion going on about the equestrian section that's been running since 2017 and how TeamPolice can go about that and help them. A lot of the questions I think have been answered in some kind of way. So how do competitions improve well-being and performance, etc. I think one of the more direct questions here that I could give you is that as team sports need fitness, which gyms can assist, I would be interested in the views of the panel in relation to the lack of joined up senior approach to gyms in lockdown, i.e. gyms being closed when they are really private, some forces keeping theirs open and some forces not reopening theirs. So I know this is an issue that has come up before, but that's one of the more direct questions that I have for you here.
Thanks, Elisa. I think, Vanessa, you raised the inconsistency part in your opening remarks. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh gosh, forced gyms. I'll keep it brief because I could talk a long time on this issue. I think so I can only talk from a West Midlands point of view on gyms because chief constables have health and safety responsibilities for their respective forces. We here in the West Midlands could not see a way when national gyms were closed for all the reasons that we could keep our gyms open here. That's the first thing I would say. If some forces have managed to do it, fine. I don't know which ones. We just couldn't see a way. And we also didn't feel it sent the right message to communities if they couldn't use the gym, but hey, we could. It didn't feel right. Very, very contentious issues around gyms. And I've had a number of personal conversations with officers, very impassioned officers who implore us to keep the gyms open. So let's forget COVID, just get the gyms open. And my experience across 3 forces now are that gyms come in a variety of sizes, a variety of states of repair or disrepair, and it's really difficult. What we tried to do here in the West Midlands was offer people discounted gym membership so that they could get the proper facilities, properly health and safety considerations and used. And the feedback we're getting is that some people love that. They think that's brilliant. So if you look at things like some gyms are open now 24/7, so that really meets anyone's needs. Other officers saying to me, that's not what I want. What I want is where I can nip downstairs, I can do a workout before or after work, and that's what I want. And that's where the problem comes in terms of how do you maintain those gyms, but also how do you get consistency? So where you've got passionate people who take time and effort, a bit like the UK sport, and do it, but actually, if I work over, I'll use West Mids at Solihull, for example. Well, that's not fair because I haven't got a gym over there. So we're trying to work through that at the moment. We are reopening our gyms where they meet the health and safety criteria for COVID, and we're having quite strict things put in place because we've got to, because it's about people's safety. But moving forward, we need to look at a better model. We need to look at potentially 3 super gyms in the force. Maybe they're externally contracted. That will cost money, but we'll need to look at how we do that. But they've got to be safe. If you go upstairs in Wolverhampton here, they've got a punch bag that's slung over. They've taken a tile out the wall and they've slung the chain over. Great, but actually makes me cringe when I go in there because it's not particularly safe. But we need to be consistent for staff no matter where you work across the force. If people want force gyms, how do we manage to facilitate that in a safe way, in a way that's consistent for people? There's no easy answer to this. It's really tricky. But I hear the staff here, and I'm sure it's the same across the country. We do need to find our way through it.
Yeah, it's been a consistent theme, actually, Matt. Through the webinars and from the feedback we've been getting, because it's not only those who are serving, it's also, we've had a lot of feedback from those who have been recently retired. And again, the police covenant, which is coming in, is going to include not only serving, but retired and family members. And I think there's something which has to change within the service, that when you do retire, you're almost stripped of everything when you leave, and you become a non-entity. Whereas I think many other organisations embrace that, and I think certainly we've had quite a lot of feedback from retired members saying they'd love to keep accessing force gyms, which is a problem because a lot of them are contained within police estates. But Matt, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Well, firstly, I think the police covenant is to start where you finished. The police covenant is a really important point for us to keep circling back on. I hope it will re-emerge into the narrative, to the conversations we're having with government and chiefs are having. So so keep the police covenant in view is definitely important. And as you say, what in military terms would be called veterans forming part of that community, I think is an important thing to keep in view. On gyms specifically, I think Vanessa's dealt brilliantly with the COVID point. I think that's absolutely the dilemma we faced. But there's probably inevitably a mixed economy for gyms going forward for forces, because if you're a very dispersed rural force, or you're a force where a lot of people potentially live outside the force area and commute in, and certainly a portion of our staff do that in the Met, things like discounted memberships, corporate memberships at 24-hour gyms probably are an attractive part of that mixed economy. But I personally, in my last force, the kind of idea of having a fewer, better quality gyms in the big buildings that had a lot of footfall was definitely important. And I saw them as being a partnership 3 ways. between the force, between the federation or the staff associations, and your sports and social club. And I've seen some great examples of the federation putting the tellies up, the sports and social club buying the gym equipment and maintaining it, and the force making sure the environment was clean and safe and had been refurbished. So I think it's a partnership between at least those elements. The one thing I would say that, you know, there's two things I just finished with on it. Firstly, we need to have high levels of personal responsibility as well. And that includes the way we maintain our environments. So sorry to be a bit sort of tactical, but everyone will have been into a gym, a police gym, and not everyone, many people have been in a police gym and seen a note pinned up saying, could the person who removed the weights collar or left the stuff all over the place or whatever, please make sure next time they don't, or please return X or Y. We've got to respect, if we're going to have them in police buildings, they've got to be respected and treated professionally and seen as part of our professional environment. And I've seen some really good examples of that. And that might mean either professional management or paying honoraria to the people, or making sure you're cleaning contracts, whatever. There's a number of ways you can do that. The final thing I would say on gyms is they need to be inclusive, in my view. And we've all got, you know, I am not somebody who wants to go into a gym and throw around massive free weights and, you know, get myself, you know, to a position where I've got arms like Garth, you know, which is a bit of a 20th century reference for you there, Gavin. You'd like that one. You know, I'm not into that. That's not what I'm in there for. I want to go in and use a, you know, rowing machine, running machine, use some, you know, maybe use some free weights or some, you know, gym equipment. But I want the person who's coming in doing the couch to 5K and wants to get on the treadmill, or the person who wants to come in and spin a bit on the bike to feel as included, and that to include, you know, we've called out gender in particular already today, but, you know, men and women, and, you know, in every sense, people in there, all their diversity. So they need to be inclusive, you know, places if they're going to be part of a workplace which is, you know, which we're pledged to be inclusive.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Brad, Sally, what's your experience of this issue?
Well, quite a bit actually, because I've spent an hour in a meeting today talking about the reopening of gyms. So, yeah, and if there's been anything that's really polarized views, it's got to be the gym. So I can understand everything that Vanessa's touched upon. I've got a bit of a clear view on it. For very good reasons, we couldn't have the gyms open in Northumbria, and I'll speak about Northumbria. And one, it just wouldn't have looked right while private gyms were shut. The community view, the health and safety reasons alone in COVID didn't allow for that to happen. I think that was the right thing to do. It was the right decision to be made. As time has progressed, and we're now seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, the questions have emerged again. When are the gyms opening? When are the gyms opening? And I think we are certainly looking at a roadmap, and we're actively looking to open the gyms, but in a safe environment for people to come in and use the equipment. And what will happen with that is it'll need to be COVID secure. And again, on a very tactical level, we can do that. It's interesting, Matt's point about inclusivity, because what we've identified is that there are some members of our organisation who have one form of disability or others, and our gyms really don't cater for individuals like that. You know, and there are some people who are wheelchair bound. We would like to make them inclusive for those individuals. That could take some replacing of gyms in different rooms, but we're well on the road to actually considering that. So I think gyms will reopen. I think there probably isn't the consistency nationally across all police forces where there's a plan. It's very much left down to the individual forces and health and safety managers to advise on that. But certainly from a Northumbria position, it's very much, let's look at ways that we can, and we might not open them all at the same time. We might have a staged approach. But I think there's enough demand there for us to do that, and it's the right thing to do, but in a safe and secure way.
Thanks, Brad. Sally, what's your observations on this issue? Because it's a running theme through these webinars.
Yeah, I have to say, and obviously from a Warwickshire perspective, I know we've discussed it at length at the Sports and Social, and we're very keen to make sure we've got accessibility to gyms, and we are going through a process of obviously investing in those, and we're in the process of unlocking our gyms at the moment. So we do value that. Part of our work with our health and wellbeing is to allow officers at least 2 hours during their tour of duty to go to the gym. Obviously they're accessible to being on patrol, so we're doing all we can to actually support them. So I think we're in a good position in Warwickshire we're enhancing the economic input into the gym. We do actually have a really good team that oversees this, so we do have the various equipment available, and it has gone out to sort of tenure to the members to say what do they need, what do they want, and that's actually been listened to, and obviously the equipment was invested in. So I think it's been quite an inclusive look at our gyms, both from the Sports and Social Federation and the organisation as mentioned earlier. So I think Warwickshire understand the importance in health and wellbeing, and obviously are developing that through the gyms.
Sounds fantastic. Thanks, Sally. I just want to, before I bring another question in, let's get an external perspective. And I did say I would bring in Mark.
Yeah, can I just quickly say, I think Matt needs to step away, Gavin, so I think he just wants to say goodbye.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry.
Apologies, Matt. Please.
Sorry, Gav. I've already overshot, but I'm just so compelled by the conversation. I've stuck with it, but I've got to step away. And I just wanted to say a couple of things, really. Firstly, hugely motivating conversation, really helpful to get all the perspectives of different people. Super heartened by what I just heard from Sally. I think it goes to show that there are lots of examples all around the country of forces doing the right things, and probably something Vanessa and I have both listened to carefully there is the question of how do we raise everybody up, how do we get some kind of consistency, and is that by sort of getting those real exemplars up as role models, and also trying to continue to set some expectations. So absolutely brilliant. Thanks again to everyone who's joined. You will carry on. You're going to turn to our sponsors. Thanks again to them, and definitely some things for the to-do list. I've got about 6 already on mine. Gav, you'll let me know what the others are.
You did ask, Matt.
I know, and I'm really keen to, and we'll work together as a team to take everything forward that's been discussed. So enjoy the rest of the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Matt. Mark, Carl, can I just bring you in quickly? So external perspective, just hearing that discussion, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was trying to make some notes. I think the first reminder for me, as you were all talking through it, and by the way, I'm going nowhere near the gyms. I get the feeling the gym is a hot potato. I'm not touching the gym. But there's loads of really interesting stuff being said. It's a nice reminder for me of how I feel quite fortunate that we work for now like quite a medium-sized organisation. So when Carl and I joined, there was 50 of us. And now there's a few hundred, and we're in a few locations around the world. So some of the, and like, as our business is growing, like this challenge to like drive performance, and make sure whilst we try and put focus on performance, we retain, the right style of community engagement and inclusivity that respects all the differences we have in our growing workplace is a really, really big challenge. And I hope there's a way that we can all harness the power of sport for good without focusing too much on the fact that not everyone wants to do sport or enjoy it. And I think the way we framed it at Magnet is less about the facilities we provide. We've now, and Carl might be able to kind of correct me here, but I remember, I think we hit this tipping point when we got to a couple of hundred people, and we've now got the Magnet. Actually, you see that this is the Difference Makers Committee, and that's all about our community engagement. And we do a lot of work internally and with some charities to challenge ourselves to do more with the community. And we have also this 1% pledge. So what we give to our teams and to our staff is a commitment that they can have 1% of their work time to choose an endeavour that makes an impact in the community. And a lot of people choose to do that through sport. And we really support and encourage that. Now, we don't have the scale of business to to have the opportunity to run numerous sports teams like you do, and nor do we have some of the same pressures. We still have very, like Carl and I can basically go to the CEO and say, we'd like to do this, yes or no. And that's a real gift. You've got a lot of different challenges there, it seems to me. The only other observation I'd have from hearing this today, and it's really interesting, genuinely, there's loads of stuff being mentioned. You know, on one hand, we're talking elite performance and what we can learn about from sport. There was actually a podcast I listened to called Land of the Giants about the Netflix story, and they see themselves as a sports team and not a family. And some of that podcast is actually almost like that's a really challenging idea, because we all see workplace, this inclusive family, and they're like, no, we challenge each other to perform, and if you don't make the grade, you get cut. Now, I'm not suggesting, you know, that's a comfortable position, but that explores some of that idea. So I think at the elite end, I mean, how many incredible, you know, Sally today on you know, some of the performance in the police, some of the capabilities you've got are incredible and real role models internally and in the community. So I think there's that high-end performance benefit of sport, and there's just the well-being. For people like me, we're kind of hacking it around a golf course, trying to do whatever I'm doing now, but that is often seen as a cost. And I think what we've recognized, especially through coronavirus times, it's not a cost, it's essential. It's essential for the individuals and it's essential for the communities. So this 1% pledge, I think we're saying we need to do this. We need to do this out of corporate responsibility and our well-being. Because we're all going mad. We're all going mad, aren't we? So we frame the 1% not as a sport, but as a choose something you can do to kind of look after your own health and give back.
Mark, thank you. Carl, I'm bringing you at the moment because I know we've got another question. So, Lisa, can I have the next question, please?
Yeah, of course you can. I just wanted to say that Simon Frank here had a suggestion to kind of harness the power of LinkedIn and maybe potentially harness the power of other social media platforms. He said that he saw a DCC post something and had over 650 reactions and comments from fellow staff and officers, and some people, you know, say that maybe we should leverage that a little bit more. Then we have a question from Linda here that says, do team sports improve community cohesion and relationships with local police? She said that she thinks Matt mentioned it before, and she said in her experience working with communities in sports also leads to demand reductions. Do the panel have any comments on this?
It's a good question, that, and it has been mentioned a couple of times. Vanessa, can I just bring you on that? Because is this something which is widening the sort of the purview of Police Sport UK, or has this always been there in terms of police sport being part of community cohesion, being involved with communities?
So I think there's two different elements to this, and I know Brad spoke earlier, and I thought Brad's, you know, made me think about something different. So we have, you know, had occasions where police teams have played against community teams. I would say the majority of our involvement is getting involved and helping to run, whether it be through the cadets or whether it be through other, you know, PCSOs or neighbourhood officers helping to run community teams. So I think there's two elements. I think there's that, but I think actually, you know, our teams playing against teams within the community, you know, and there have been some examples of it, could be a real positive way, you know, as long as they're not those community teams going out to sort of, you know, nobble the police team. There's a way to, you know, get one over. But that's maybe me being a little bit cynical. But I think that could be brilliant, you know, and why not? And I do know that police teams have taken part in competitions, you know, that are not just police competitions, and they do get involved in other things. So I think it can only be a benefit, definitely.
I got to say, my personal experience, and this goes back many, many years of when playing rugby with some local teams. Some of them were on the teams were people that we'd actually arrested. But the conversation was a completely different conversation on the field in sport than it was out there. So there is something there, intangible there. Brad, Sally, what's your thoughts on this?
It's interesting what Vanessa says. I've played in some of those games where somebody has deliberately tried to nobble us, and there has been a little bit of that. But just putting those less frequent incidents to one side, I think, look, it takes time to build those relationships with communities. We spent a good 5 to 8 years in Durham hand picking community teams to play against, purely because they came from parts of Durham where there were quite significant issues in terms of policing. Whether that ever manifested itself through to reduced demand, I don't think we were set up to evaluate that in any way, shape or form. But what I can say is that very much like you, Gavin, some of the teams I've played against and my colleagues did have people who'd been arrested for domestic violence and alcohol related offences, and the conversation was entirely different. And what might have started off as an opportunity to kick the police, certainly 5 years later wasn't, as those relationships had been developed. So I do think that you know, developing those links with the community through sport has its benefits.
Thank you. Sally, what's your thoughts on this?
I think it's essential. I think our involvement with, we've had involvement with youth sport, with the Youth Basketball League, and also the Aspire programme for girls. And we actually had a really good session with them. Just, it literally was a relationship between playing basketball, developing their skills, but then also talking about what the police do, even down to our own roles. I mean, one of our players at the time was actually battling breast cancer, and we were talking about that during this session. And we had an opportunity to talk to those young girls about their futures. And ironically, one of the young girls had said to me, you know, I'm just going to be on the streets anyway. And I asked her the question, well, why did she think that? And she just went, well, it's just the way it is. And we had time to talk through that with her. So I think sport and the community, especially with policing, is an essential way to go. And I think the more strategic we become about that, I think the more inclusive it will be, and the more participation we'll have with members of the community and our teams. So I certainly know from a Warwickshire perspective, we're dealing with some issues within the locality, and we plan to use sport, certainly basketball, as one of those forums to actually get involved in the community to reduce violent crime. So I think it has a place to play, or a part to play, in how we develop sport within our organisations.
Really interesting. My sense is I think this is another one of those strategies or takeaways for Matt's to-do list. I'll remind him actually when I speak to him next. Well, we've got 5-10 minutes left. So Lisa, have we got another question, please?
How can we develop more grassroots team sports to encourage our non-sporty colleagues to get active, and so that they can get those same benefits out of team sports? So I'd like to have the view of the panelists about that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that was asked actually, because it is important. How do we encourage sort of people who would not normally think about joining a team sport, being part of a team? How do we encourage that at the grassroots level within the service? Vanessa?
So I think there's a couple of things here. The first one is, you know, is what do we tell people when they join the organisation? You know, how do we sell it in a way around well-being? And that links to the second point, which is, you know, is it part of our well-being package, for want of a better phrase? I think Matt made a really interesting point before by saying, you know, he doesn't want to go in a gym and lift heavy weights and sort of, you know, do that maybe what is viewed as a traditional, you know, gym. People can feel intimidated, you know. So what are we doing to raise awareness of what's available in the force and what benefits can be given? And if I come back to this, you know, what do we give our staff? So do we give them any time to do this? Because that's probably a really good way to encourage people to get involved in something they might not try before, is if you say to them, look, you know, we will give you an allotted time, either per month, per quarter, or whatever it might be, and all we ask is that you go and do something a little bit different, because it'd be really hard, you know. I'm kind of now at the age where I've been to gyms for long enough that it doesn't really bother me, but I completely understand how people feel intimidated to go into a gym and think it is all about lifting really heavy weights, when actually, you know, 10 minutes on a bike, you know, and we show them how to do that, might just get them to think, actually, that wasn't so bad, and I do it. So I think at a number of different levels, but it's really incumbent on us to try and do that.
Thanks, Vanessa. Brad, Sally, how do you encourage you know, people to come into your respective sports from the grassroots level? Brad.
Sally, do you want to go first? Oh, I'll start. Yeah, no problem. I think Vanessa's right. We have to cater for everybody's needs, don't we? And it's not so much as going into a gym. It's less about the facilities than the opportunity to get involved in different types of sports. So, for example, within Northumbria Police, under the sports and social umbrella, there are about 30 sports that people take part in. Now, I include within that a rambling club, people who like to go walking in the lakes, people who like to do canoeing. There's an e-sport club. Some people might not agree with e-sport being a sport, but look, there's interest in it. So there are, we've recently authorised, oh my God, what's the one where you jump on all the boxes? Forgive me. What's it called?
I don't know. Free
running or the parkour thing?
Yeah, it's the Reebok one. I can't remember the name of it.
CrossFit.
CrossFit, yeah, that's what I was
CrossFit, yeah. Sorry, I couldn't. If that's age, isn't it? I can't remember things. No, so we are supporting a number of sports outside of the regulars like football, cricket. I mean, there's a real significant angling section within Northumbria Police. So the way we promote this is that, it doesn't matter what entry route you come into Northumbria Police, whether you're a special constable, a volunteer, a PCDA entrant, graduate entrant, you are given the same input and provided with details as to what you can get involved in, which is fantastic because I think it opens people's eyes as to what's out there. So it's not necessarily just about gyms, but I think Vanessa's point's right. If you can then support that further with, you can have so much time off to get involved in things, then actually that gives the people the confidence, firstly, to know what's available, but secondly, to think, well, actually, there will be some time allowed for me to do this. And I think that's the more important bit. So one, it's about providing the wide variety of different activities to get involved in. And secondly, and this is where the chief officers play an important part, but it's giving a bit back and allowing them the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Brad. Sally.
Warwickshire, we host family days where we showcase all the different sports and social activities that we can actually have access to. And they've been a real success within the organisation. I know we've got one coming up fairly soon, but from a basketball perspective, we could obviously go there and take the hoop, give them competitions to play in, and obviously talk about what value it is to play basketball. But the good part with that is, and obviously from the previous webinar, is that we can actually bring the families in and the families can participate. So I think that's probably the way forward for many forces, is that if you host family days that showcase your sports and social, then obviously they'll get a real feel as to what that sport's about or that activity, and potentially then sign up to later on. But I totally agree about the opportunity to give time back. It's very difficult to get people involved in a sport when they have to give all of their time for themselves. So I think it's really important that the organisations support each other so that players can actually have some time away to enjoy that physical activity or just that time to themselves.
Thank you, Sally. I'm going to draw this together now, but Vanessa, I just wanted to give you the opportunity, being on the management committee, any last reflections before we sort of draw stumps?
I just think, opportunities like this are brilliant to hear from people. I think we have developed a huge list for Matt to do, which is great, which obviously I will support him with. But I think what this shows us is there are some really, really passionate people out there. It shows us that the importance of team sport and the opportunities actually that policing can give to people's well-being. Thank you to the sponsors because it's given certainly me some things to go away and think about. It's shown me the passion that's out there, and actually we can do an awful lot for the greater good.
Thank you, Vanessa. And just to reinforce that, I'd like to thank Magnet Forensics for supporting this webinar and being part of our widening group of business sponsors. I'll make a quick play here that if you either listen to this now or on the recording and you are a business and you want to become part of the TeamPolice, the Police Sport UK as a partner, we'd love to hear from you and have a conversation with you. I think I'd also like to thank Vanessa, Matt, Brad and Sally. I know all four of you give your own time up for police sports. It only works for that personal commitment, as Matt said. So thank you for what you do for police sport up and down the country. I'd like to thank Elisa for keeping this in order and making it work, because it was touch and go a couple of times. But in the meantime, I know we've got some outstanding questions. If there are any more questions, we will do our best to answer them outside this. But it just leaves me to thank everybody for coming on to the webinar and being part of this conversation. There's a lot that we can take away from this. Final reminder, we've got one final webinar. I think it's about cricket, anyone for cricket, on the 15th of June. So I'd like to wish you all health, and hopefully by the 15th of June, we'll be even more optimistic, seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and start to experience sport again. Thank you, everybody, for taking part.